Two 9-year-old twin boys board a plane with their parents, just like any other family. But within minutes, the smiles fade. A flight attendant blocks their path to business class and says the words no child should hear. "These seats aren't for you." Was it a mistake? A misunderstanding, or something far more deliberate? As the tension builds mid-air, another passenger steps in, not with anger, but with quiet power. What no one knows is that this man isn't just any passenger. He's the CEO of the entire airline. Why didn't he reveal himself earlier? What did the elderly black veteran in seat 5B whisper that changed everything? And when the dust settles, who walks off that plane truly changed? This story will challenge what you think you know about justice, dignity, and what it means to truly take a stand, even when you're 30,000 feet in the sky. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that move hearts, spark minds, and remind us who we're meant to be. Now, let's begin. The cabin lights cast a soft, inviting glow across the sleek, polished interior of Flight 821. Outside, the Seattle skies hinted at dawn, their indigo canvas slowly surrendering to bands of amber and gold. The low hum of boarding announcements echoed gently, blending with murmurs of passengers settling in for the long journey to Boston. In the spacious aisle of Skylux Airline's premium cabin, Cynthia Brooks adjusted her navy blue uniform with practiced ease. At 55, Cynthia had spent nearly 3 decades mastering the subtle art of cabin service, transforming each flight into an effortless dance of hospitality. Yet this morning, as she glanced at the passenger manifest on her tablet, her usually steady hands trembled slightly. She sighed quietly, feeling the familiar unwelcome tension creeping up her spine. Long hours and tight schedules had worn her patience thin. Cynthia scanned the premium section, a haven of wide leather seats, generous leg room, and soft blankets meticulously folded at every place setting. It was her territory, a carefully curated space she fiercely protected from disruption. The expectations here were sky high, and today, something in the air felt off. Then, she saw them. 2 young boys stood hesitantly at row 3, their eyes wide, looking slightly uncertain. Both wore matching Seattle Mariners hoodies, their short dark hair tousled from what had likely been a rushed morning. Each clutched a small backpack decorated with superhero emblems. They whispered softly to each other, heads close together, like conspirators plotting their next move. Cynthia's lips pressed together in mild irritation. She quickly glanced at her tablet again, then back at the boys. She was certain these seats were listed under an entirely different passenger category, unaccompanied minors, in premium class, unusual. Perhaps a glitch, she thought dismissively. Without giving it another moment, she approached them, professional smile in place, yet her tone undeniably firm. "I'm sorry, but these seats aren't for you," Cynthia announced clearly, blocking their path forward. The words landed heavily, shattering the cabin's calm, creating ripples of attention from passengers nearby. Both boys froze immediately, eyes wide with confusion. The taller of the two, Ethan, glanced nervously toward his twin brother Lucas, whose small fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. Lucas looked up, visibly frightened, his large brown eyes shimmering with the beginnings of tears. But Ethan began uncertainly, his voice shaking with the innocent courage of an 8-year-old child. "Oh, our tickets say seats 3A and 3B. Cynthia softened her voice slightly, yet the edge of her authority remained unmistakable. "Young man, I believe there must be some confusion. These seats are reserved for premium passengers. I'll help you find your seats back in economy." Passengers nearby had begun to whisper, casting curious, judgmental glances at the unfolding scene. Cynthia felt her cheeks flush with the uncomfortable heat of embarrassment, frustration tugging at her composure. She had dealt with unruly passengers countless times, yet something about the vulnerability on these children's faces tugged at her conscience. She hesitated briefly, a flicker of doubt piercing her resolve. At that precise moment, a tall, distinguished-looking man quietly stepped into the aisle. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, his dark hair flecked gently with silver at the temples. His presence alone exuded authority, though his expression remained calm, controlled, and deeply empathetic. Without announcing himself, he paused briefly, assessing the situation with penetrating yet gentle eyes. Alexander Bennett had learned long ago the importance of observing first, acting second. "Excuse me," he interjected softly yet authoritatively, stepping forward so Cynthia could clearly see him. The cabin fell instantly quiet, passengers sensing the gravity of the moment. Alexander's eyes settled first on the flight attendant, then gently onto the two boys. He knelt beside Ethan and Lucas, his voice warm, protective, soothing their visible distress. "Boys, is everything all right here?" Both Ethan and Lucas seemed to breathe simultaneously, the tension draining slightly from their small shoulders as recognition dawned in their eyes. "Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice wavering with relief. "She said these seats aren't ours, but—" Alexander nodded calmly, placing one reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let me handle this," he said softly, before rising slowly to face Cynthia directly, his eyes now steely but not unkind. Cynthia's heart quickened slightly under his gaze, a faint flush of anxiety creeping up her neck. She hadn't recognized him immediately, but as his authoritative yet gentle voice filled the cabin, the realization struck her like a lightning bolt. "Ms. Brooks," he said gently yet pointedly, reading her name tag deliberately. "I'm Alexander Bennett, CEO of Skylux Airlines." He paused, allowing the weight of his title to settle briefly. "And these two young gentlemen are my sons." An audible gasp rippled through the cabin, the whispers around them growing louder and more fervent. Cynthia stood frozen, suddenly overwhelmed by embarrassment, regret, and a profound sense of humiliation. Her cheeks burned as Alexander continued, maintaining composure and dignity. "The seats they're occupying, 3A and 3B, are exactly where they're supposed to be," Alexander said, clearly but without malice. "I personally booked these reservations. Their mother and I are seated directly behind them." He gestured quietly to Priya Bennett, who now stepped forward gracefully, her calm presence offering silent support. Priya's expression was understanding, yet deeply disappointed. Cynthia's breath caught painfully in her throat, her stomach tightening with shame and self-reproach. The seasoned flight attendant felt the floor shift beneath her, as the realization of her careless assumption hit home. I'm terribly sorry. Mr. Bennett?" Cynthia finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes cast downward. "I made a mistake, and—" Alexander raised his hand gently, silencing her apology before it could fully form. His expression softened, empathy visible in his eyes, but the quiet strength of his conviction unwavering. "We'll discuss this further." "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact that communicated far more than words ever could. "For now, let's ensure we all get to Boston comfortably and safely." Cynthia nodded silently, stepping back to allow the Bennett family to settle into their seats. She retreated quietly, a storm of emotions swirling within her heart. Little did she know, this brief confrontation was just the beginning of a day that would change her life and Skylux Airlines forever. The alarm buzzed sharply, jolting Cynthia Brooks awake into the darkness of her modest Portland apartment. It was 4 p.m., the same unforgiving hour she had greeted thousands of times before. Her fingers instinctively reached out, silencing the piercing tone, and for a brief moment, she lay still, staring upward into the soft darkness, gathering strength for the day ahead. 27 years as a flight attendant had taught her that mornings never got easier. Each day demanded the same unwavering energy, the same practiced smile, the same poised demeanor, regardless of her personal exhaustion. Cynthia exhaled slowly, her breath lingering in the quiet stillness. She could already feel the day's stress inching toward her, unseen yet undeniably present, like an uninvited guest waiting at the doorstep. Slowly, Cynthia pushed herself up, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed and feeling the familiar ache in her lower back, an ever-present reminder of countless hours spent standing in narrow airplane aisles. She rubbed her eyes gently, attempting to shake off the lingering fatigue that settled permanently into her bones. In the dim light, her eyes caught sight of an old photograph resting quietly on her nightstand. It showed a younger Cynthia, vibrant and smiling proudly in her brand-new Skylux uniform, her gaze filled with hope and excitement. The world had seemed limitless back then. The sky, a gateway to adventure. A wistful sigh escaped her lips as she stood and stretched, joints quietly protesting the early hour. Back then, flying had meant something special. It had felt glamorous, filled with promises of new cities and interesting people. Now, nearly 3 decades later, the once thrilling adventure had faded into routine, punctuated by long days, impatient passengers, and tight schedules. Yet, despite everything, Cynthia had always carried herself with dignity. Her job mattered. She was the steadying presence passengers relied upon when things went wrong. But lately, even her unwavering optimism had begun to dim. Financial strain gnawed constantly at her peace of mind. Rising rents, mounting bills, and the constant worry about retirement left her feeling vulnerable, uncertain of her future. She sometimes wondered how much longer she could keep up the facade of effortless professionalism. Would there ever be a moment of genuine relief? Or was this weariness simply the price paid for stability? She padded softly toward the kitchen, the familiar ritual of coffee making, serving as an anchor to her morning routine. As the machine brewed softly, Cynthia caught her reflection in the window above the sink, noticing faint lines etched deeply around her eyes, quiet reminders of every stressful flight and sleepless night. She reached up unconsciously, touching her face softly, as if trying to smooth away those persistent markers of time and fatigue. Just then, her phone vibrated, pulling her from self-reflection. A quick glance at the screen revealed a message from her daughter. Megan, good luck today. Mom call you later about Dad. Cynthia's heart sank slightly. Her ex-husband, Paul, had recently been diagnosed with dementia, a reality she had yet to fully accept. Even though their marriage ended years ago, Paul's illness had inexplicably become her responsibility. The constant emotional drain weighed heavily on her mind. She tapped a short reply. Will do, sweetheart. Love you. And set the phone aside, trying to refocus her thoughts on the flight ahead. Seattle to Boston was a long route, promising an exhausting day. She mentally reviewed her checklist as she sipped her coffee, the warm liquid offering temporary comfort against the morning chill. At precisely 4:45 a.m., Cynthia donned her uniform, meticulously pinning her Skylux Airlines badge onto her blazer. The polished gold wings glistened softly in the lamplight, symbols of service and dedication. Despite her internal struggles, she took genuine pride in wearing them, her sense of professionalism deeply ingrained over the years, her appearance impeccable, her demeanor unflappable. Cynthia Brooks prepared to face another demanding day. As she stepped out into the quiet pre-dawn street, the cool Pacific Northwest air greeted her, carrying a faint scent of rain. Her rideshare driver, a young woman named Ashley, waited quietly at the curb, greeting her warmly as Cynthia climbed into the back seat. "Early morning flight," Ashley asked gently, glancing at Cynthia through the rearview mirror. "Seattle to Boston," Cynthia answered with practiced politeness. "Should be an interesting day." The ride to the airport was peaceful, the city's quiet streets offering Cynthia a brief reprieve. Her mind drifted toward the passengers she would soon encounter, anticipating the familiar blend of entitlement and impatience often present in the premium cabin. It was a delicate balancing act, keeping passengers satisfied while enforcing necessary rules and boundaries. Upon arrival at the airport, Cynthia navigated security with practiced efficiency, her polished badge granting her swift passage. The airport terminal buzzed quietly with the early morning crowd, a steady stream of passengers slowly awakening. In the crew lounge, she joined her fellow flight attendants, exchanging brief pleasantries while silently noting their tired eyes and forced smiles. Each one carried their own hidden burdens, masked carefully behind impeccable uniforms and courteous manners. Tom Jensen, a senior attendant she'd known for decades, approached her with a knowing smile. "Morning." "Cynthia. Heard we've got a packed flight today. You handling premium, yes. Seattle to Boston." "You know how those East Coast flights can get," she replied quietly, the tension of the day already settling into her voice. Tom chuckled softly, nodding understandingly. "Just another day in paradise." "Huh." She smiled faintly, appreciating his familiar sarcasm. Yet, inside her, an unspoken dread lingered. Lately, each flight seemed heavier, each passenger interaction more taxing. She wondered briefly if Tom felt the same way, if behind his composed facade, he too wrestled silently with doubt and fatigue. "Did you hear about the company changes?" Tom continued casually, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "Rumor has it they're looking to streamline crews again. Efficiency reviews or something like that." Cynthia felt a pang of anxiety grip her chest. Efficiency reviews typically meant pressure on senior crew members like herself. It was corporate language for cost-cutting, and it rarely favored employees. The prospect of starting over, of losing the job she'd given half her life to, suddenly loomed very real. "They always talk about changes." "Tom," she responded calmly, forcing confidence she did not feel. "We just have to keep doing our best." Tom nodded sympathetically, sensing her unease. "We'll get through it. Cynthia, we always do." As boarding time approached, Cynthia moved methodically through pre-flight preparations, her thoughts divided between the routine duties at hand and the uncertain future Tom had hinted at. She reviewed the manifest one final time, noting 2 names listed as unaccompanied minors in premium class seats, 3A and 3B. Strange, she thought briefly, pushing the anomaly aside in favor of her familiar assumption that children rarely belonged in premium class without adult supervision. Little did Cynthia know, her quiet assumption was about to be challenged profoundly, shaking not just her day, but her very sense of identity. She took a steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared herself once again for the uncertainties ahead. The soft chime of Alexander Bennett's smartwatch buzzed gently at 4:45. But he was already awake. He lay quietly in bed, staring at the ceiling of the high-rise apartment he and Priya had called home for the past 12 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the downtown Portland skyline. Still cloaked in darkness, the early morning hours too quiet to belong to any city. He had barely slept. Even in the stillness, his mind pulsed with movement. Numbers, timelines, market projections, flight schedules, investor briefs, regulatory updates from Washington, and lately, the looming merger, the potential acquisition of Cascade Regional, a growing West Coast carrier, had consumed his attention for weeks. It was the kind of move that could elevate Skylux Airlines into a top 2 national airline. It could also fail spectacularly, and take him with it. He exhaled slowly, trying to release the noise in his head. Beside him, Priya stirred, her arm reaching for him instinctively in the dark. Her hand brushed his shoulder. "You're thinking again," she mumbled, eyes still closed. "Always," he replied, softly amused. She opened her eyes halfway and smiled sleepily. "You promised. No CEO mode this morning. Just dad mode." Alexander smiled gently. "Trying." "Try harder," she said, her voice teasing but warm. "Your sons have been talking about this trip for weeks." "I know. I'm here," he assured her. But his eyes drifted toward the nightstand where his tablet rested silently, glowing with unread notifications. Priya reached over and flipped it face down. "No. You'll see those after Boston. Today, you fly as a father, not as the man who signs paychecks." Alexander let out a quiet chuckle, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Yes, ma'am." She rolled onto her side and tucked the blanket back around herself. "Go wake the boys. They'll want extra time to debate which astronaut socks to wear." He stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness of middle age, then headed down the hallway toward the room at the end. The door was already cracked open, and as expected, the twins were awake. Ethan sat cross-legged on the bed, poring over a book on jet engines, while Lucas carefully organized a stack of magnetic building tiles on the floor. The morning light had barely crept in, yet their energy was unmistakable. Dad Ethan grinned when he saw him. "Did you know the Boeing 787 has a fuel efficiency of 30% better than the 767 I did?" Alexander said, ruffling his son's hair. "But did you know it was designed that way because of increased composite material use in the fuselage?" Lucas looked up, eyes wide. "Wait, like carbon fiber." "Exactly," Alexander replied, taking a seat at the edge of the bed. "It's why the plane is lighter, faster, and uses less fuel. One of the first wide-body jets to be built mostly with carbon composite." "I want to be an aerospace engineer," Ethan announced proudly. "I want to be a pilot," Lucas countered. Alexander smiled. "You can both do both." He let the moment linger, watching their faces light up with the joy of possibility. In these moments, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a father. Just a father. "All right," he said finally. "Finish packing. We're leaving in 30 minutes. Mom said we can wear our Galaxy Explorer shirts." Lucas grinned. "Even though they're technically pajamas, I think they're technically perfect for today," Alexander replied. In the kitchen, Priya poured orange juice into travel-friendly cups, her phone buzzing with client messages she was actively ignoring. She was the founder of Insight Horizon, a consulting firm that worked with Fortune 500 companies to improve equity, leadership culture, and inclusion. Her work was emotional, often exhausting, and almost always slow-moving. But it mattered, and the more her husband climbed the corporate ladder, the more necessary her work felt, not just in the world, but in their own home. Alexander was a good man, a principled leader, but even good men could become blind in the face of profit. She looked up as the boys tumbled into the room, one carrying a stuffed astronaut, the other dragging a carry-on with stickers from every airport they'd ever visited. Alexander followed behind them with two neatly packed suitcases in hand. Flight 821 to Boston. Let's do this. By the time they arrived at Portland International Airport, the sun had only just risen. The terminal buzzed with the polite chaos of early travelers. Alexander had insisted on keeping their check-in as ordinary as possible. No escorts, no flagged bookings. The tickets were reserved under Priya's family name, Kapoor, a small effort at anonymity. As they moved through security, Ethan and Lucas each handed over their boarding passes proudly. TSA agents smiled at them, amused by their serious expressions and oversized lanyards that read Future Pilot. Alexander watched quietly as Priya handled their final checks, and for a moment, he felt both pride and guilt. She bore the weight of the emotional labor in their family, especially during his frequent absences. She made it all look effortless, but he knew the weight it carried. In the boarding area, he checked his watch. They had 30 minutes before departure. Lucas climbed into his lap. "Dad, do you think we'll get to visit the cockpit?" "I think so," Alexander said. "But we'll ask the purser first. It depends on how busy the crew is." "Will the pilot be a woman?" Ethan asked suddenly. Alexander looked at him, surprised and impressed. "Maybe." "Why?" "Because I read that only 6% of airline pilots in America are women," Ethan said seriously, "and I think that's dumb." Priya laughed softly from her seat beside them. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." Alexander gave his son a proud smile, and again felt the pull of two opposing forces within himself. One was ambition, the desire to lead Skylux into a new era of scale and dominance. The other was responsibility, the quiet, enormous obligation to model better leadership for his sons, and for the people who trusted him. Across the gate, a loud conversation between two disgruntled passengers caught his attention. A woman was berating a gate agent about a delayed flight to Denver. She was loud, sharp, and condescending. Alexander watched the gate agent's face carefully. She smiled through clenched teeth, the way Priya sometimes did when explaining emotional labor to a boardroom of oblivious executives. He looked down at Lucas, still resting his head on his shoulder, and made himself a promise. One day, these boys would take their own flights. They'd board as young men, not children. And the way they would treat others in those spaces would start with what they witnessed today. A moment later, the announcement came. Flight 821 to Boston is now boarding. We invite our premium cabin passengers, families traveling with children, and Skylux Platinum members to begin boarding. Priya stood and straightened her blazer. Ethan and Lucas grabbed their backpacks and marched ahead like they were leading a lunar expedition. Alexander followed them toward the gate, unaware that someone already on board was reviewing a passenger manifest and quietly questioning how two unaccompanied children had been assigned seats in business class. They were only 10 minutes away from a moment that would ignite a public firestorm. The familiar scent of fresh upholstery and citrus-infused disinfectant drifted through the cabin as Cynthia Brooks made her final checks before passenger boarding. Business class was spotless. Pillows fluffed, amenity kits aligned precisely. Every element, from seatback safety cards to touchscreen remotes, gleamed under the soft overhead lights. It was the kind of perfection that only came from ritual repetition, the kind of order she depended on to mask the quiet chaos within her. Cynthia scanned her tablet. 16 passengers listed for the premium section. 2 names caught her attention again: Kapoor and Al Kapoor. Seats 3A and 3B. The manifest had flagged them as minors, unaccompanied. No guardian listed next to their seats. She frowned, tapping the screen for details. Nothing changed. A system error, perhaps, or a mistake from the booking agent. She sighed and made a mental note to check manually. Children traveling alone in business class. Highly unusual, especially 2 of them. It wasn't her place to question company policy, but she had learned over the years that certain situations, if left unchecked, could cause all sorts of disruption mid-flight. She would address it early and politely before takeoff. Cynthia turned as the first wave of passengers began to board. She smiled, nodding as travelers filtered in with efficient familiarity. Frequent flyers, mostly business types, clean suits and clipped voices. The soft clack of hard-soled shoes. People who expected to be catered to, but didn't necessarily want conversation. Then came the twins. Ethan and Lucas Kapoor, though their last name was actually Bennett, marched confidently down the aisle in their Galaxy Explorers t-shirts and matching carry-ons. Their short, dark hair and brown skin made them stand out in the sea of navy blazers and khaki chinos. They stopped at row 3 and stood in front of their seats as instructed. 3A and 3B, Ethan said, proud of having remembered. "This is us. Look at this screen," Lucas whispered, already exploring the seat controls. "It has its own remote." Cynthia approached from the forward galley. Tablet still in hand, her tone was neutral, but her stance communicated authority. She had dealt with confused children before. Sometimes they misunderstood gate numbers or seat assignments. Other times, they were simply assigned incorrectly and had to be moved. Either way, she needed to manage the situation quickly. "Hello there," she greeted them with a practiced smile. "Are you boys flying alone today?" Ethan looked up, uncertain. "No, our parents are coming. They're right behind us." Lucas nodded and pointed down the aisle. "They're in 3C and 3D. Cynthia's brow furrowed. She hadn't seen any adults listed with the same last name. She tapped her screen again, but the passenger list remained unchanged. No adult Kapoor in premium. Her voice lowered slightly. "Do you have your boarding passes with you?" Both boys handed them over obediently. Cynthia scanned the codes. 3A and 3B, premium. Correct. Still, something didn't sit right with her. She glanced back up the aisle, expecting to see a set of parents hurrying in after the boys, but the flow of passengers had paused. "I'm going to ask you to wait a moment." "All right," she said carefully, stepping slightly into the aisle to prevent them from settling into their seats. "These seats are in the premium cabin, and we just need to confirm something before takeoff." Lucas blinked. "We're supposed to sit here. Our dad booked the tickets." Cynthia was about to respond when a calm, steady voice cut through the air behind her. "That's correct. I booked those seats." Alexander Bennett stepped into view with Priya just behind him. His tone was even, but his eyes were already scanning Cynthia's posture, her position between his sons and their seats. The expression on his face was one she used to see from senior pursers during training audits. Measured, direct, prepared. "Is there an issue?" he asked. Cynthia froze for half a breath. The man was impeccably dressed, though not flashy. His tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and quiet confidence immediately set him apart. She couldn't place his face, but his presence was unmistakable. A high-status traveler, possibly someone from corporate. "No issue," she said quickly. "I just needed to confirm that these children were accompanied. The manifest listed them as unaccompanied minors. I used my wife's maiden name for the booking." Alexander replied, "For privacy." Priya stepped forward with a calm but firm expression. "My last name is Kapoor. These are our sons, Ethan and Lucas. We're seated right across from them." Cynthia's cheeks flushed. She looked down at her tablet again, now realizing the discrepancy. Kapoor. She hadn't considered that the boys might be traveling under their mother's name. She had assumed they were alone, because their name didn't match anyone else in premium. "I see," she said, trying to recover. "That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying." Alexander nodded once. "Of course." Cynthia stepped back and gestured toward the seats. "Please, go ahead and get settled." The boys climbed into their seats eagerly, now relaxed. But Priya lingered for a second longer. Her gaze was steady, not hostile, but unmistakably clear. "We'd appreciate being approached more carefully next time," she said softly. "Understood," Cynthia replied. Alexander gave a polite nod, then leaned over to help Ethan stow his backpack in the overhead bin. The moment passed, but it left an invisible mark. Cynthia returned to the galley, her heart pounding slightly. It was a simple mistake, a name mismatch, a misunderstanding. But it had unfolded in front of other passengers. A man of status, a poised woman who had not raised her voice, but had made her point sharply, and 2 children who had done nothing wrong. She glanced back down the aisle and caught one of the other business-class passengers watching her with quiet judgment. A younger woman in a designer blouse, lips pursed in disapproval. Cynthia turned away, back at her station. She took a slow breath and checked the manifest again, this time more thoroughly. The rest of the names blurred in front of her eyes. Her own mistake churned in her chest like a knot. Why had she assumed they were alone? Why had she blocked them? Because their names didn't match. Because they looked too young. Because they looked too brown. The thought sent a flicker of unease through her. She pushed it down. There was work to be done. Safety checks. Welcome service. Beverage prep. The flight hadn't even taken off yet, and already her day was veering off course. Meanwhile, across the aisle, Alexander buckled his seatbelt and leaned back slightly. Priya had already begun helping the boys find their headphones and tablets. Their excitement had returned, but Alexander remained unsettled. He had seen Cynthia's expression. It wasn't cruelty, it was assumption, the kind that wrapped itself in professionalism, the kind that passed unnoticed, unless you lived in its shadow every day. He said nothing for now, but he would remember it. The cabin door closed with a heavy click. They were airborne less than 15 minutes later. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign fading out was followed by the subtle shift of bodies getting comfortable. Recliners adjusted, tablets powered on, coffee orders whispered politely. Flight 821 was cruising at 30,000 feet, and for the moment, the cabin hummed with calm, but beneath that calm, 2 people were anything but at peace. Cynthia Brooks stood near the front galley, one hand on the beverage cart, the other resting lightly against the cabin wall. Her body moved on autopilot, checking gauges, restocking creamers, organizing napkins. Her hands remembered what her heart could not forget. She replayed the moment from earlier again. The boys, their confusion, the father's quiet authority, the mother's precision, the way those nearby passengers watched, judged, And that woman's words. We'd appreciate being approached more carefully next time. It hadn't been shouted. It hadn't needed to be. The quiet disappointment in her voice had cut deeper than anger ever could. Cynthia could still hear it, soft but sharp like glass beneath silk. Was it racism? The question made Cynthia's stomach twist. She had asked herself before, quietly, uncomfortably, at night when the plane was still and her mind loud. Had she ever treated someone differently because of how they looked? She wanted to believe the answer was no, that she had always been fair, respectful, professional, but the truth gnawed at her. Sometimes assumptions were invisible. That was the problem. You did not see the bias because it was not loud. It was quiet, like hers had been this morning. A name mismatch, a quick assumption, a gentle blockade that carried a deeper weight. She looked down the aisle now. The boys were settled. Lucas was watching a space documentary. Ethan was scribbling into a notebook. Their parents sat across from them, both calm, both composed. But Alexander Bennett's expression had not softened. He had said little since takeoff, but his silence held presence. He was watching. She knew it, back in his seat. Alexander sipped his black coffee slowly. He was not angry. Not yet. Anger was too simple. What he felt was more complex disappointment tinged with sadness. He had wanted to be just a father on this flight, not the CEO, not the executive who made decisions about culture, policy, inclusion, just a dad, flying cross-country with his wife and children. But the moment Cynthia stepped between his sons and their seats, that wish had evaporated, not in cruelty, not in rage, but in the echo of an old pattern, one that Priya had spoken of often. The difference between intention and impact. Cynthia had not meant to be offensive, but that did not erase the offense, and that was what too many people failed to understand. He glanced at Priya now. She was reading quietly, one hand resting gently on Lucas's shoulder. She had said her piece and let it go, as she often did. But he could see the tension in her jaw. She too was not fully relaxed. He leaned over slightly. "Are you all right?" She nodded, without looking up. "I just keep thinking how often this happens, and how much we excuse it." "You mean what she did?" "I mean what so many do," Priya said softly. "They don't realize that these moments chip away at a person. One assumption at a time, one pause, one sideways glance, one, 'Are you sure you're in the right seat?'" He looked down at his sons, blissfully unaware of the layers beneath that morning's moment. They had returned to their joy, their curiosity. But how long would that last? How many more mistakes would it take before that joy gave way to guardedness? He hated that question, and he hated that he could not protect them from it forever. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. Priya finally looked up at him. Her eyes were kind, but clear. "I know you will. Just make sure it doesn't come from anger." "It won't," Alexander said. "But it will come." Cynthia moved slowly down the aisle, offering beverages with a practiced smile. She approached the Bennetts last, pausing beside their row. Her tray rested in her hands, but her voice faltered for the first time all flight. "Would you like anything to drink?" Alexander looked up, his expression neutral. "Coffee. Black," he said. "Orange juice, please," Priya added. "And for the boys, water," Ethan replied. "With no ice." "Same," Lucas echoed. Cynthia nodded, her hand steady even as her heart quickened. She poured, passed, thanked, then lingered a second too long. "I just wanted to say," she began quietly, "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding earlier." Alexander met her eyes. His silence was deliberate. "I shouldn't have assumed," Cynthia continued. her voice softer now. "I know it may have seemed like I didn't want them here. That wasn't my intent. It rarely is," Priya said, her tone not unkind, but firm. Cynthia nodded once and stepped back. "Enjoy the rest of your flight." She returned to the galley, each step feeling heavier than it should. She had apologized. She had tried, but the weight of the mistake lingered. Across the cabin, Alexander looked at his sons, then down at the cup of black coffee in his hands. It tasted exactly as it always did, burnt, bitter, predictable. He didn't need the apology to feel better. He needed the system to stop creating moments where apologies were necessary. And right now, that system wore a navy uniform and polished shoes. But she was not the only one. She was one of many. Later in the flight, as the sun stretched into the sky outside, casting golden rays across the window panes, Lucas tugged on Alexander's sleeve. "Dad, why did the flight attendant think we weren't supposed to sit here?" Alexander paused. "That's a good question," he said. "Do you remember how sometimes people make guesses too quickly?" Lucas nodded. "Well," Alexander continued, "sometimes adults do that too. They see something they don't expect, and they assume it's a mistake. But it wasn't." Lucas said, "We were in the right seats." "You were," Alexander affirmed, "and you handled it perfectly." Lucas leaned into him, reassured, but the question had been asked, and Alexander knew it would return again, in some other form, some other place, one day, not so far away. He looked toward the front of the plane. The flight was only halfway over. The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a blanket. For a time, everything felt still. The Bennetts had settled into a quiet rhythm. Priya was reading a memoir by an indigenous professor. Ethan and Lucas were trading trivia questions from their space exploration book. Alexander had opened his laptop, but hadn't typed a single word. His mind wasn't on spreadsheets or acquisition timelines. It was still on the woman in the Navy uniform, and the apology that hadn't felt like enough. But just as the tension began to soften, another voice rose up behind them. Soft at first, murmured, but unmistakable. "I'm just saying," a woman whispered. "There used to be a time when business class had a certain standard. Look at row 3. It's a daycare center." Alexander froze. The voice had come from one row behind him. Seat 4A. Priya looked up from her book. She had heard it too. Her fingers gripped the page so tightly it wrinkled beneath her thumb. Another voice responded. "Male? Older? British? Maybe? Why bother booking premium if you're going to sit next to children? They should be in the back." The woman laughed quietly. Or better yet, with a nanny. But I suppose that's not their style. Alexander turned his head slowly, just enough to glimpse the couple. The woman was wearing oversized pearl earrings and a beige linen blouse. Her husband sipped sparkling water with a thin smirk on his face. Their voices had dropped again. But the damage was done. They had not expected to be heard. Or maybe they had. Because people like that often assumed they were safe in their prejudice as long as it was whispered. Priya reached over and placed a calming hand on Alexander's arm. "Not now," she whispered. "They're talking about our sons," he replied, his voice flat with quiet fire. "I know, but let them rot in their discomfort." Lucas looked up from his window seat. "Is something wrong?" Alexander turned back with a calm smile. "Nothing for you to worry about, buddy." But Priya knew. She knew from the way his jaw tensed, from the silence that followed. He was not someone who let things fester quietly. He would address it. It was only a matter of when. Cynthia Brooks stood at the galley entry, having caught just the tail end of the exchange. She didn't hear every word, but the tone had been unmistakable. Disdain, disgust, and from people she recognized instantly. The couple in 4A and 4B, Martin and Elaine Dempsey. She remembered them clearly from previous flights. Well-dressed, well-mannered, well-practiced in coded condescension. They never raised their voices, never caused a scene, but there was always a lingering edge to their requests, a smile that didn't touch the eyes, a tone that dripped with subtle entitlement. They were the kind of passengers who thought polite racism wasn't racism at all. Cynthia hesitated. She could ignore it. It would be easier. It always was. But something about the moment earlier still hadn't left her. The boys, the father's eyes, the weight of what she had almost done. She was tired of feeling that weight alone. She stepped forward and approached seats 4A and 4B, her steps slow but purposeful. "Mr. and Mrs. Dempsey," she began quietly. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Martin Dempsey looked up, startled. "Yes, of course," why Elaine's voice followed. "We're quite comfortable. Thank you." Cynthia nodded, then leaned in just slightly. Her voice remained polite, but now carried a quiet warning. "I thought I heard some comments earlier about our younger passengers. I wanted to remind you that all guests in this cabin have the same rights, regardless of age, and that includes the right not to be whispered about." Elaine blinked. Martin's face stiffened. "I think you may have misheard," he said. "Perhaps," Cynthia replied. "But if I didn't, I hope it won't happen again." She stepped away without another word. It wasn't a confrontation, not quite, but the couple sat a little stiffer after that. The whispering stopped. Back in seat 3C. Alexander exhaled slowly. He had heard every word. So had Priya. And for the first time since boarding, something shifted in both of them. It wasn't absolution, but it was the first sign of accountability. A rare moment when someone on the inside said something out loud. Alexander leaned toward Priya. "Did you hear that?" She nodded, still watching Cynthia's retreating figure. "Yes. I didn't expect her to say anything. Neither did I." For a while, no one spoke. Later, when Cynthia returned to offer snacks, her voice was steadier. She handed Lucas a bag of pretzels and smiled when he said thank you. She poured orange juice for Ethan without being asked. Her eyes met Priya's for half a second, then Alexander's. It was not an apology. It was something else. Recognition. Across the aisle. Elaine Dempsey rolled her eyes and pulled her cashmere shawl tighter. Martin continued sipping his sparkling water, looking anywhere but at the family ahead of him. Cynthia stood for a moment in the aisle, watching the rows, then returned to the galley. Behind the curtain, she reached into the drawer where the crew kept spare chocolate bars meant for long-haul flights and set 2 aside. She wasn't sure why, but maybe, just maybe, it would mean something. She looked out the small galley window, where the sun had now crested the edge of the cloud line, painting the sky in soft amber and violet. Something about it reminded her of a promise she once made when she first wore the uniform. Oh, to treat every passenger like they mattered. She had forgotten that once, but not today. Not again. Somewhere over the Midwest, about 2 hours from Boston, the flight began to shake. It started the light rattle, the kind that makes you glance up from your screen, pause mid-sentence, and wonder if you imagined it. But then it came again stronger. A groan through the airframe, a sudden lurch. Passengers looked up in unison as the aircraft gave a sharp dip. Cynthia was near the galley, securing trays, when the overhead chime pinged and the captain's voice broke through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." She moved quickly, checking the aisle, ensuring passengers were compliant, her training kicking in like muscle memory in just seconds. She had returned to her jump seat, buckled in tightly as the aircraft jolted again, this time with more force, in business class. Alexander instinctively reached across the aisle toward Ethan and Lucas. "You okay?" he asked. Steadying his voice, Ethan nodded, gripping the armrest. Lucas clutched his backpack like a life vest. "Is this normal?" "A little bumpy," Alexander said. "Nothing to be afraid of." Priya leaned over to squeeze both boys' hands. "Close your eyes if it helps. Imagine we're bouncing on clouds." The plane dropped again, just slightly, but enough to elicit a gasp from one of the passengers behind them. The cabin lights flickered once. Cynthia kept her gaze locked forward, but her chest tightened. She had flown through worse, but it was never pleasant, never predictable. She stole a glance sideways toward the forward section of business class. Her eyes landed on the Bennett family. The father's arms stretched protectively across the aisle, the mother's eyes never leaving her son's. It stirred something in Cynthia she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear, but also clarity. The moment reminded her of another flight, years ago, the one she took with Megan when she was just 6 years old. Back then, Megan had clutched her little stuffed rabbit while Cynthia sat beside her. Pretending everything was fine, it had been the same kind of turbulence, the same kind of helplessness. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp shake. One of the overhead bins popped slightly ajar. A laptop bag jostled inside. "Bin 3, Cynthia murmured into the phone line attached to her seat. Lid loosened. "Holding. Copy." The voice of the rear attendant responded. As the plane continued to rattle, murmurs began to rise. Some passengers whispered nervously, others clutched their drinks or sat rigidly upright, as if posture could anchor them. Elaine Dempsey in 4A let out a short, startled cry as her water sloshed onto her lap. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she hissed. Martin looked over. "It's turbulence, dear, not Armageddon. That's easy for you to say. My blouse is soaked." She reached for her call button, but Cynthia didn't move. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. Nobody was to leave their seats until cleared. In seat 3B, Lucas began to breathe faster. "I don't like this," he whispered. Alexander leaned over. "You remember what we said about the wings?" Lucas nodded. "They're made to move like this. They're built to handle it." Priya joined in, brushing a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead. "Let's breathe together, just like we do at bedtime." She closed her eyes and inhaled slowly, waiting for them to follow. The boys mirrored her. One breath, then another. Cynthia watched silently from her seat. They were doing everything right, modeling calm, breathing through fear, holding each other without shame. And something in her cracked a little. She thought of Megan again. Not the 6-year-old version, but the 17-year-old one. The girl who had begged her not to work this flight. The one who had said, "You never see it until it's too late." Cynthia had brushed her off. Now she wondered what her daughter would say if she had seen her block those boys from their seats earlier. Would Megan have recognized the pattern faster than she did? Would she have spoken up? The shaking began to lessen, gradually softening into a mild vibration. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the tension in the cabin began to ease. Quiet conversations resumed. People exhaled, Some even chuckled nervously, their laughter more relief than joy. Cynthia unbuckled and stood. Her legs were steady again. She approached the Bennetts slowly, still uncertain of the space between them. Alexander looked up first. "Everyone okay here?" she asked gently. He nodded. The boys were brave. Cynthia turned to them, crouching just slightly. "You two did great. Better than a lot of grown-ups I've seen." Ethan smiled weakly. "We did breathing." "I saw," Cynthia said. "You helped each other. That's what family does." Lucas looked up. "Was that the worst turbulence you've ever had?" "No," she replied, "but it reminded me of one flight I'll never forget. My daughter was about your age, and she held my hand the whole time. She told me I was braver than I felt." Lucas grinned. "You have a daughter, I do," Cynthia said. "She's almost an adult now." Priya offered a soft smile. "She must be proud of you." Cynthia hesitated. "I hope so," she said. For the first time that day, her voice carried something new. Regret. The plane continued to coast along smoothly. The clouds outside had thinned, revealing patches of blue sky. Sunshine poured through the windows like a quiet apology. Back in seat 4A, Elaine Dempsey reached for a napkin, blotting at her shirt. She glared forward, eyes still sharp with irritation. Her husband said nothing, but even they had quieted. Later, when snacks were served again, Cynthia returned to the Bennetts with 2 extra chocolate bars. "These are from the long-haul stash," she whispered. "Don't tell the pilots." The boys giggled, delighted. Alexander watched quietly, nodding once in silent thanks. And for the first time since takeoff, Cynthia felt something begin to shift. It wasn't absolution, but it was the start of something better. The sky outside the cabin windows stretched wide and pale, the color of early afternoon linen. Clouds floated gently beneath them now, no longer threatening, just drifting like quiet witnesses. Everything inside the plane had stilled into a kind of false serenity, but Cynthia Brooks couldn't settle. She stood near the front galley, staring out of the small oval window, hands clasped behind her back. The catering drawer was stocked, the trash bins cleared. There was nothing left to clean, nothing to fix, and yet her thoughts kept circling. She kept hearing the breath in Lucas's voice when he whispered, "I don't like this." She kept seeing Alexander Bennett's hand stretch across the aisle, a wall of quiet strength. And she kept hearing her daughter's words from that morning, "You don't see it until it's too late." She pulled her phone from the secure drawer beneath the galley counter. Crew weren't supposed to check personal devices during mid-flight, but something in her chest ached like a pressure valve ready to snap. She needed a sliver of connection, something real. The screen lit up. One new voice message. "Megan." Cynthia tapped play and held the speaker low, near her waist. The hum of the engines almost swallowed the first words. But Megan's voice cut through. "Hi, Mom. I know you're flying today. I just wanted to say sorry for earlier." Cynthia blinked. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "I know you're trying. I do. But sometimes it feels like you don't hear me. Not really." There was a pause. Megan's breathing was audible on the recording. "I see things every day at school that you would never believe. And I wonder if I'll spend my whole life being told it's not that bad, or that people didn't mean it like that, or that I should be more understanding." Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't want to have to explain racism to my own mother. Mom, I want to know you already know." Cynthia closed her eyes. "I know you love me, but I need you to listen too." Not just when I'm angry. Not just when I cry. I need you to believe me." The message ended. Cynthia stood frozen, the screen now dark in her palm. The words circled around her like smoke she couldn't escape. Megan hadn't yelled. She hadn't begged. She had simply spoken the truth she lived. And it sounded an awful lot like what Priya had said earlier. We'd appreciate being approached more carefully, and what Alexander had said with his silence. She had thought her mistake was a moment, a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. It was a reflection of something much older, something she had never truly named. She slipped the phone back into the drawer and closed it gently. From the cabin, a voice called out, "Excuse me, could we get a refill here?" Cynthia straightened. Elaine Dempsey again. Her tone was flat with impatience. Not cruel, not loud, just entitled. As if the turbulence had been a personal inconvenience and the crew existed only to correct it. Cynthia moved to the row. "Yes, ma'am." Sparkling water. Elaine nodded without a glance. Martin Dempsey folded his arms and muttered, "Let's hope this bottle's chilled properly this time." Cynthia handed the glass without comment. She no longer flinched at the condescension. It felt small now compared to the voice still echoing in her ears. Back in row 3, Ethan had fallen asleep with his head against the window, headphones still on. Lucas was still awake, idly doodling on the in-flight notepad. Priya leaned over with a soft smile, whispering something only a mother would know how to say. Alexander, however, was watching Cynthia. She felt it. Not suspicion anymore. Something else. She walked slowly to their row. "Do you mind if I ask a question?" she said gently, looking toward Alexander. He gave a slight nod. "Of course." "When they were scared," she said, motioning toward the boys, "you knew exactly what to say. You didn't just tell them to calm down. You gave them something to hold on to, a way to breathe." Alexander's eyes softened. "I've had practice," he replied. "With fear, with being expected to stay composed so others feel safe," he said, "even when I don't." Priya looked over and added, "There's a difference between calm and invisible. We teach our boys to be calm, but never to disappear." Cynthia absorbed that in silence. Then she said, "My daughter left me a voice message today. She said she wants me to believe her when she tells me how the world sees her." "Smart daughter," Priya said. "She's 17. Her name is Megan. And today, I saw something in this cabin I think I've spent too many years trying not to see." Alexander said nothing, but the muscles in his jaw unclenched slightly. "I didn't handle this flight the way I should have," Cynthia continued. "I know that now, and I'm sorry. This time, it wasn't about procedures or misunderstandings. It wasn't about the tablet or the manifest. It was about the weight behind a pause, the pause she had placed between two children and the seats their father had booked." Alexander finally spoke. "I don't expect perfection from people," he said, "but I do expect learning." "You have it," Cynthia said, "from me. From now on." Priya nodded, her eyes no longer defensive. A quiet understanding settled between them. Not resolution, not yet, but a thread of recognition, and for the first time, Cynthia felt like she wasn't pretending to be part of a solution. She was becoming one. She returned to the galley and opened the secure drawer once more. This time, not for her phone, but for the notepad Megan had given her last Christmas, the one she had never used. She pulled it out, clicked a pen, and wrote 4 words on the first page. Listen, believe, reflect, change. Then she underlined the last one twice. Outside. The sunlight had shifted again, painting the clouds in deep gold and soft lilac. Somewhere behind her. The intercom clicked on with the captain's voice announcing an hour to landing, an hour more to fly, an hour more to grow. The sky outside the plane had shifted into a soft gradient of fading gold. Somewhere far below, small towns and highways passed unseen beneath the clouds. But inside the cabin of Flight 821 something was rising. It began with a voice, not loud, but firm, irritated. "I'm not sitting here if he stays." The voice came from row 5A, a new passenger who had changed seats during turbulence. Mid-30s, tailored blazer, designer sunglasses pushed high on his head. His name, according to the manifest, was Jordan Caldwell. Cynthia was near the back of business class when she heard it. She moved toward the voice, already sensing the weight behind the words. When she reached the row, she found Caldwell standing in the aisle, arms folded, glaring at a quiet man who had just taken the window seat beside him. The man beside him was older, 70, perhaps, dark-skinned, wearing a veteran's hat and holding a worn paperback. He looked down, not reacting. "Sir," Cynthia said evenly. "Is there a problem I paid for business class?" Caldwell snapped, not looking at her. "I didn't pay to sit next to someone who smells like that." Cynthia stiffened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice. It's not about race," he said, holding up a hand before she could respond. "I'm just saying this seat wasn't sanitized properly. And now I have to breathe in someone else's lunch." Cynthia turned to the elderly man. "Sir, are you comfortable where you are?" The man nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. He's not even talking," Caldwell muttered. "Probably doesn't speak English. This is ridiculous." By now, heads were turning. Several passengers had gone quiet. Some looked away. Others stared. A familiar ripple of discomfort spread. The kind people felt when something wrong was happening, but no one was quite sure if they were supposed to say anything. Cynthia opened her mouth, but someone else spoke first. "Is there a reason you're still standing here?" The voice was quiet, but commanding. It came from Alexander Bennett. He had risen from his seat and was walking slowly toward them. His expression was composed, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Caldwell turned. "Excuse me." Alexander didn't blink. "You're creating a scene. That gentleman hasn't said a word. You, however, have made 4 offensive statements in less than a minute." "Who are you?" Caldwell snapped. Alexander stopped in the aisle, 3 feet from him. "The man who's going to make sure you regret that question." Cynthia moved between them, gently but firmly. "Gentlemen, please, we can handle this without." But Alexander stepped slightly to the side, not threatening, just deliberate. "I asked you a question," Caldwell said again. "Louder now. Who are you?" Alexander turned to Cynthia. "Would you please contact the pilot and request a direct line to Aura Airlines corporate operations?" And Boston Caldwell's eyebrows raised. "Why, what does that have to do with—" "Because," Alexander said, his voice low, "this aircraft is registered under my corporate umbrella. And as of this month, I'm chairman of the executive board, which means I decide who flies." For a moment, no one moved. Even Cynthia blinked. The elderly man in the seat looked up slowly. His eyes met Alexander's. There was a flicker of recognition, then gratitude. Caldwell laughed nervously. "You expect me to believe that Priya stood now, too?" Her eyes fixed on Caldwell. "You should. Because if my husband says he owns the sky you're standing in, you better start looking for parachutes." Lucas and Ethan looked up from their seats, wide-eyed. "Dad?" Ethan asked. Alexander didn't break his gaze. Cynthia stepped aside and reached for the cabin phone. "This is lead 1 to cockpit," she said quietly. "Requesting secure connection to Aura Executive Ops. Priority code 7. There was a short pause on the other end. "Confirmed," the captain responded. "Establishing now." Caldwell's smile was fading. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said, softer now. You were just letting the real you out," Alexander said. "And now you'll deal with the consequences." "I can apologize," Caldwell said quickly. "We don't need to escalate this." "This isn't escalation," Alexander replied. "This is accountability. You chose to make someone feel less than human on my aircraft. And the moment you did, you made this my problem." Cynthia held out the phone toward Alexander. "They're on the line." He took the receiver, his tone still calm. "This is Bennett." "Yes. I need a full behavioral review logged on passenger Caldwell. Seat 5A. Cross-reference with today's timestamp and in-flight recording. I'm authorizing immediate blacklist from all partner routes, both domestic and international." He paused. "Effective immediately." Caldwell stood frozen. "You can't do that," he said, voice trembling now. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Alexander said. "You didn't care who that man was. You only cared that he didn't look like your version of business class." Cynthia looked down at the elderly gentleman. "Sir, would you prefer to move forward? We have an open seat in row 2. He shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. I'm fine here. I've sat through worse in my life." Alexander turned to him, extended his hand. "Thank you for your patience." The man nodded, shook it. "You did good, son. They'll remember that." Alexander walked back to his seat. Priya was waiting, her hand already reaching out for his. When he sat down, she leaned over. "I've never seen you do that." He nodded slowly. "I've never needed to. Until today." Behind him, Caldwell sat down stiffly, eyes forward, mouth closed. A storm had passed through the cabin, but not a single drop had come from the sky. The cabin slowly fell into a hush, even with the engines humming beneath them and the occasional clink of a glass. Something had shifted. A current had passed through, brushing every row like a silent ripple. Most passengers were still processing what had just happened. Some looked stunned. A few seemed embarrassed, their faces turned toward their screens. And others, like Priya and the boys, sat with the deep, still breath of people who had waited a long time to see the world tilt toward justice, even just for a moment. But it was Cynthia who felt the weight most of all. She stood again near the galley, her hands folded loosely in front of her. The adrenaline had begun to wear off, leaving behind something quieter. Not fatigue, but reflection. She had witnessed something she hadn't expected. The man in seat 3A. Alexander Bennett wasn't just a father protecting his children. He wasn't just a man with power. He had wielded that power not to humiliate, not to retaliate, but to protect the dignity of someone else, someone most people in that cabin would have looked past. She had looked past him, too. That man in 5B, the one who hadn't flinched, hadn't spoken until spoken to, the one who had sat calmly while judgment tried to shrink him. She had to speak to him. Cynthia made her way down the aisle. When she reached row 5, she gently crouched beside the older gentleman. "Sir," she said softly, "would you mind if I sat here for a minute?" He looked at her, then gave a slight nod. She lowered herself into the empty aisle seat, folding her hands on her lap. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, "for what happened and for not stepping in sooner." The man gave her a long, thoughtful look before replying, "You're the first person to say that to me in quite a while." Cynthia swallowed. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it." "No," he said, "but I've seen worse." He extended his hand. "Raymond Ellis." Cynthia shook it gently. "Cynthia Brooks." There was a pause, comfortable somehow. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "can I ask how you stayed so calm?" He smiled faintly. "Age does that, and so does understanding the difference between loud power and quiet truth." Cynthia tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Raymond leaned back in his seat, eyes gazing toward the window where the sky was now painted in early dusk. "When I was 21, he said, "I rode a bus through Mississippi with a book on my lap and a bruise on my cheek. I sat in the back because that was where people expected me to sit. But I always made sure I was reading something they didn't expect me to understand." "What were you reading?" Cynthia asked. "Walt Whitman," he said. The irony was not lost on me. She smiled. "I've lived through protests, beatings, small victories that felt like miracles, and long winters where nothing seemed to change." He continued, "And through it all, I've learned that dignity isn't about how the world sees you. It's about how you carry yourself when the world forgets to look." Cynthia's eyes welled unexpectedly. "You carried yourself with grace," she said quietly, "and I almost missed it." "You saw it eventually," he replied, "and that matters too." Another pause. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "do you ever get tired of being the one who stays calm, who makes it easier for everyone else?" Raymond's expression softened. "Every day. But I don't do it for them. I do it for the kids who are watching, the ones like those boys in row 3. Cynthia looked back toward the Bennett twins. Lucas had fallen asleep. Ethan was drawing on a napkin with a hotel pen, tongue peeking out the side of his mouth in concentration. "They're lucky," she said, "to have parents like that." Raymond nodded. "And now they've got a plane full of people who saw how far a father will go to protect his sons. That matters." Cynthia let the silence stretch for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the same notepad from earlier. She flipped to the page she'd written on. "Listen, believe, reflect, change." She turned it so Raymond could read it. "I'm trying," she said. He smiled and nodded once, then keep going. Cynthia stood slowly. "Would you like anything?" "A drink, maybe just water," he said. "But cold." She smiled. "Coming right up." As she returned to the galley, something sat lighter in her chest. Not gone, not healed, but no longer alone. She had spoken to someone who had lived the pages of history people like her had only read in school books, and he had met her not with bitterness, but with a story, a bridge. She filled a glass with ice water, added a lemon wedge, and returned quietly to his seat. As she handed it over, she placed her other hand gently over his. "Thank you," she said, "for what he asked, for showing me how to begin again." Back near the front of the cabin, Alexander had returned to his seat. He was quiet now, letting the adrenaline pass. Priya rested her head on his shoulder, saying nothing. There was nothing to say, just the sound of breath, of belonging. "You did good," she finally whispered. "I didn't want to," Alexander replied. "Not like that. But I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You didn't shout. You didn't embarrass anyone. You told the truth," she said. "That matters. In the seats across from them. Ethan held up his napkin drawing. Mom, Dad. Look, it's the plane. Priya smiled. That's amazing, baby. Ethan pointed at a small figure he'd drawn near the wing. That's you. Dad. Alexander looked. The figure was small but strong, standing just ahead of the clouds, arms out, not to fight, but to shield. He blinked once and reached out to ruffle his son's hair. I love it, he said. The flight attendants began their final beverage service. The sky outside was now a deep orange, the beginning of evening. Seatbelt signs flickered softly. The destination was near, but something deeper had been reached already. For the passengers of Flight 821, especially those in rows 3 and 5, this wasn't just a journey between cities. It was a journey toward understanding. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and measured. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our initial descent into Boston Logan International. Current weather on the ground is 64 degrees and clear skies. We expect to be at the gate in approximately 25 minutes. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and all carry-on items are stowed. There was a soft ripple of movement in the cabin. People stretched. Some sat up straighter. Others glanced at their phones, checking for the familiar signal bars that meant they had returned to the real world. But for Cynthia Brooks, the descent brought something else. It brought time. Time to think. Time to reflect. Time, finally, to call Megan. She slipped into the forward crew jump seat and secured her harness, then reached for her personal phone tucked discreetly in her pocket. As soon as the aircraft's internal Wi-Fi allowed messaging, a new notification appeared. Missed call, Megan Brooks. New message. Call me when you can. Please. Cynthia stared at the screen. She inhaled once, slowly, as if gathering breath before jumping into deep water. Then she tapped call. It rang twice. Then, Mom Megan's voice was soft, a little uncertain. I'm here, Cynthia said, and I'm okay. A pause. Then, did you get my voicemail I did? Cynthia replied. I listened to it in the galley, right after turbulence hit. I haven't stopped thinking about it since. Another silence. I didn't mean to make you feel bad, Megan said. You didn't, Cynthia replied. You made me feel seen. For the first time in a long time, I stopped defending my intentions and just listened. And I realized something. What that I've been afraid of naming the things you live through daily. Because once I name them, I can't unsee them. And if I can't unsee them, I have to do something about them. Megan's voice cracked slightly. That's all I ever wanted. For you to see it, and not look away. Cynthia's hand tightened around the phone. I saw it today, she whispered. More than once. She told her about the twin boys and the moment she hesitated at the gate. About the passenger who mocked Mr. Ellis. About Alexander Bennett and how he revealed who he really was, not with anger, but with integrity. I saw the cost of silence, she said, and I don't want to pay it anymore. Megan didn't speak for a while. When she finally did, her voice had shifted, softer, fuller. I believe you, she said. Cynthia closed her eyes. Those 3 words wrapped around her like a blanket. You know what Mr. Ellis told me, she said. Who's that, a man in 5B? A veteran? Someone who's seen more in one life than I could in 5. He said dignity isn't about how the world sees you. It's how you carry yourself when the world forgets to look. Wow, Megan murmured. He reminded me of you, Cynthia said. Strong, quiet, refusing to shrink. There was a sniffle on the line, then laughter. I'm not that quiet, Megan said. You should see my debate team meetings. Cynthia laughed too. tears running quietly down her cheek. "I miss you. Baby, I miss you more. Can I take you to dinner when I'm home?" Cynthia asked. "Only if I get to pick the place. You drive a hard bargain. I get it from my mom." They both smiled. "Landing soon," Cynthia said. "I'll text you when we're at the gate." "Okay. I'll be waiting." As the call ended, Cynthia sat for a moment longer, phone resting in her lap. For the first time in years, she felt like a mother again, not just in title, but in presence, in purpose. Back in row 3, Alexander was finishing a quiet conversation with Priya. She had taken his hand and gently rested it on her thigh, grounding him. He had shown strength during the confrontation, but now the gravity was setting in. "What happens when we land?" Priya asked gently. "I imagine there'll be email, phone calls, maybe media if anyone caught that moment on video. Are you ready for that?" Alexander sighed. "Not really, but I didn't choose this moment. It found me. All I can do now is answer it honestly." She nodded. "You answered it with courage. That's more than most." He looked over at his sons. Ethan had dozed off again. Lucas was staring quietly out the window, lost in thought. "They saw everything," Alexander said. "Good," Priya whispered. "Now they know who their father is, and who they can be, from behind them." Raymond Ellis watched the family in silence. A small smile played on his face. He didn't need to say anything. He had said enough. A few rows back, Jordan Caldwell remained seated, shoulders stiff, eyes locked forward. He hadn't said another word since the incident. His silence now was not the kind of dignity Raymond had spoken of. It was something else, a silence born of exposure, not reflection. As the plane dipped lower, the landscape beneath came into view. Patches of forest, rivers winding like silver threads, neighborhoods nested in clusters, Boston, home. Cynthia walked down the aisle one last time, checking seatbelts, securing trays, offering gentle smiles. When she passed Raymond, she paused. "I called my daughter," she said quietly. "I told her everything." He nodded slowly. "How'd she take it?" "She listened," Cynthia said, "and she believed me." He gave her a long, approving look. "Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be." As the wheels lowered and the runway approached, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. The plane floated gently toward the earth, a silver bird coming home. There were no announcements of what had happened mid-air. No viral videos, no clapping, just the sound of a jet carving through the wind, and a cabin full of people forever changed by what they had witnessed and what they had chosen not to ignore. The wheels touched down with a soft bump, followed by the familiar reverse thrust that echoed through the cabin like a sigh. Outside, the airport lights blurred against dusk. Logan International looked the same as always. Terminals lined with concrete, gates busy with carts, yellow lights flickering like quiet stars. But inside, Flight 821, nothing was the same. Cynthia Brooks stood near the front as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Her uniform looked crisp, her badge straight, but something had shifted in her posture. Her shoulders no longer carried silence. They carried awareness. As the plane came to a final stop at Gate 22, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and passengers rose in the usual shuffle. Bags were pulled from overheads, coats adjusted. A soft murmur of returning to routine filled the air, but there was no rushing in the front rows. No one cut ahead. No one shoved their bag beneath another's arm. People moved slowly, as if understanding they had been part of something. Raymond Ellis stood quietly in row 5. His veteran's cap was now resting in his hand. He waited, not just out of courtesy, but because he understood that dignity was never in a hurry. Cynthia approached him first. "Mr. Ellis," she said warmly, "thank you for flying with us." He smiled. "You did good. Miss Brooks. And you listened." "I did," she replied. "I'll keep doing that." She reached into her breast pocket and handed him a folded paper. "My daughter. She's starting college in the fall. She wrote this for her admissions essay. I thought you might want to read it." He unfolded it just slightly, reading the first few words. "To the man on the bus." His brow lifted. Then his eyes softened. "I'll read every word," he said. They shook hands. Then he stepped off the plane, his figure vanishing into the gate. In row 3, Alexander and Priya were helping the boys gather their things. Lucas clutched a new drawing. Ethan had a toy plane he'd been given by one of the attendants. "Ready?" Champ Alexander asked softly. Lucas nodded, but then paused. "Dad, yeah. Are people always going to think we don't belong?" Alexander crouched beside him, hands gently resting on Lucas's backpack straps. "Some might," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's true, and it doesn't mean you shrink to fit their vision." Priya knelt beside them, her voice soft. "You belong wherever you stand with truth. No one gets to take that from you." Lucas smiled, then took her hand. Ethan followed, bouncing slightly. Cynthia was waiting at the front door of the aircraft. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "may I speak with you for just a moment?" He nodded, gesturing to Priya and the boys. "Go ahead. I'll meet you inside." Once they were alone, Cynthia exhaled. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for not only what you did for Mr. Ellis, but what you showed me." Alexander tilted his head. "What's that?" "That it's not always about calling someone out," she said. "Sometimes it's about calling yourself in." He was quiet. Cynthia continued, "I've worked this job for 14 years. I know every safety code, every FAA policy, every seat configuration on 3 aircraft models. But today I learned that knowing rules doesn't make you right." Alexander's expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes softened. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "I'll be honest about one more thing," she said. "At the gate in Atlanta, when I looked at your sons, I hesitated. And that hesitation was not about a tablet or a policy. It was something else, something I need to confront." Alexander looked down briefly, then met her gaze. "We all have moments we wish we could redo," he said. "What matters is what you do next." Cynthia smiled faintly. "I called my daughter. We talked. I told her everything. For the first time, I think she believes I'm trying." He extended his hand. "Then you're already changing the next flight, even before it leaves the ground." They shook. As Alexander walked down the jet bridge, a man in a Navy suit stood just beyond the gate. His name tag read Marcus Keller, Director of Media and Communications, Aura Airlines. "Sir," he said, "we've seen the internal flight report and received 2 alerts from cabin crew. We've also been contacted by someone who filmed part of the altercation. It's going to get attention." Alexander sighed. "So be it. We can handle press if you'd like us to make a statement." Alexander paused. "No," he said. "Let them see it. Let them see what it means when people stand up for each other." Marcus hesitated. "And the passenger? Caldwell. He won't be flying with us again." "Understood." Alexander turned toward the waiting area where Priya and the boys sat by the window. He watched them for a long second before walking over and sitting down. "You all right?" Priya asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about what he watched as the boys giggled over a comic strip. Nearby, a woman in a wheelchair received help from a crew member. A man offered his charger to a stranger. A child asked his mother why that man got to sit in the front. About how change happens, Alexander said. Not with noise, but with choice. They sat there a while longer. No one asked for a picture. No one made a scene. Just a family in an airport, waiting for their bags, their car, their tomorrow. Cynthia returned to the cabin. The flight was now empty. Trash collected. Windows shaded. She leaned on the jump seat and looked around. This aircraft, she thought, has held more than luggage today. It had held truth. It had carried dignity. It had flown through turbulence no radar could detect and still landed with grace. She picked up the notepad again. On the last page, she wrote something new. This flight began at 33 feet. But the real journey started the moment we decided to see each other. She closed it, locked it away, and stepped off the plane. What began as an ordinary flight turned into something unforgettable. A moment of silent discrimination, shattered by quiet courage. A father didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. Alexander Bennett didn't just protect his sons. He protected the dignity of every passenger who had ever been made to feel small. Cynthia, the flight attendant, didn't just witness injustice. She chose to confront her silence, to rebuild trust, not with grand speeches but with listening, with change, and with love for her daughter, and Raymond Ellis, the elder who had lived through a century of struggle, reminded us all that dignity doesn't scream, it endures. We've seen the hurt caused by a few careless words, but we've also seen the healing that happens when truth walks to the front of the plane and says, enough. This story is more than a flight. It's a mirror, a call to see, to reflect, to act. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice helps us tell more stories like this. Stories that matter. Stories that change how we look at the world and at each other. Thank you for flying with us. We'll see you on the next journey.